Goodwood members meeting isn't just about cars. Goodwood has a very rich historical heritage to the world of motorcycle racing also. And this year at the members meeting, we see this, what I could only describe as a homage to the 750 Formula, pre-72, 73 kind of era. And John Thompson here is my resident expert, because John, I'm more of a car guy, I'm not an expert on bikes, but I do know who this guy is, and of course I know who he is. So tell us a little bit about, firstly, great to have you guys here at Goodwood.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that this is an era, it wasn't quite forgotten about, but hasn't been as popular with classic racing, and I think it's great that they've managed to get this sort of thing, focus on it at Goodwood this year, because, you know, classic racing is becoming very, very popular and very serious these days, not least with bikes like this, particularly the triple cylinder bikes, which are so famous in that early 70s era. Obviously they became a bit obsolescent past that with all the Japanese machinery.
Yeah, right.
But this particular year, 73, is so important because, of course, it was the first year of the series, and personally, for me and my friend Terry Williams, whose bike this was the bike that won the championship in the UK. So Barry Sheene had two bikes, the 500cc Seeley Suzuki and the 750, which he obviously raced just as much to win the championship that year. And I think we shouldn't forget about that, because classic racings tend to focus on the Manx Nortons or the later bikes.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of interest in the 70s, in the early 70s. And of course, what happened at Imola with Paul Smart winning there on the 750 Ducati, and of course over in the States it's Daytona. So there's a lot of interest now, I think, and it's great that we can get the exposure we need for that classic element of the racing scene.
Absolutely. What's happening in classic car racing is happening in classic bike racing as well. And Barry Sheene has been a household name since the 70s.
Yes.
This bike has got a pretty rich provenance then, if this is where Barry's career pretty much started.
Well, it started before that in 125 racing, obviously, but really, it has to be said, we feel this is very important. I'll tell you why, because in many ways people think of Barry Sheene racing 125s and then straight on RG 500s and win the World Championship. This is what we call the forgotten era.
Right.
For him in particular, and we want to make sure he isn't forgotten in that way. And this bike is original. Colin Seeley, I asked Colin Seeley, I gave him the frame number, and he said, do you realise what you've got here? You've got Barry Sheene's bike, because Terry didn't know that at the time.
So you guys didn't realise what bike you had?
Of a friend. It was in the loft for 20 years. He bought it off a friend. He had it in his office. He did race it in the early 80s, and he said, well, Barry Sheene's seen this bike, and as he was carting it away in bits, he said, oh, I think this is Barry Sheene's bike. And he said, what do you mean? And so it's got a frame number on. Colin Seeley, he was here yesterday, incidentally, and he verified that, and he's given him a letter of authentication. So Terry, who's a designer by trade, he can more or less turn his hand to anything. He sorted out all the tank and everything, the engine, although they got that rebuilt by one of the original Suzuki engineers.
So engine, the wheels, the running gear, the brakes, that all came in a box of bits?
Yes, everything.
Even the tank?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. The only thing we've done is replace the fairing, and Terry made the seat out of aluminium, but everything else, all the original parts were rusted to hell. They've all been cleaned up and refurbished.
Wow, that's
everything.
And rather than modernise that, we say that in classic racing, don't we? We modernise, and it's hard to do on a bike because everything's exposed, I would imagine.
Well, it's not hard to modernise. If you look at all these bikes, to be perfectly honest and fair, they've had to modernise them because of the conditions which they're racing in, the competitiveness, so the brakes, the suspension, they've had to change everything to make it safe, if nothing else. This hasn't been changed, so the brakes on this would be no good whatsoever. And when I rode it around the paddock this morning, I thought, it hasn't got any brakes, but it has. But
so this bike is not a race, this bike is just a
parade it.
And shelf queen.
There's I think Scarborough this year, they're going to have a Barry Sheene Memorial. We might try and get up there, and also I think at Pembrey. So we must try and have this out on the track as much as we can, fabulous. Even if it is only to parade it.
John, it's been a pleasure to talk to you. It's great to meet you. And you know what, Barry Sheene for me, I remember the old Kenny Roberts battle in whatever it was, 76.
How famous was that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We all remember that. Great to talk to you, John, as ever.
Thank you.